G'day folks, it's Phil from 15-Minute Guitar Practice here. Today we're going to look at some simple solo theory. Now this is part 2 to the simple chord theory that I did last time. So if you haven't watched that video and you want to follow along with this video, then go back and watch that one first. Essentially we look at the concepts of what makes each chord different to the other chords, what ingredients gets mixed around. So in this lesson, we're going to start building upon that knowledge and use a few other concepts to help us solo. So there are 4 pretty straightforward steps to this. The first is to understand the difference between the chord types. And by that I mean which notes got moved. And we covered that in the previous video. Step 2 is knowing where that particular note, or the notes that really are the color notes of the chord, where those are on the fretboard in relation to the root note of the chord. So for example, if you want to bring out the minorness in a D minor chord, you need to know where that flat 3 is in relation to the D root note. Step 3 is leveraging your understanding of the major scale structure. Now I'm going to cover that in a sec. If you don't know the major scale structure stroke formula, I have a really simple way I teach my students. And if you leverage that, then you can never play a wrong note because you always know where you are and you always know the options for where you can go next. And step 4 is basically applying all the steps 1 to 3, but for the new chord that's coming in the progression, and you play the notes from the new chord when the new chord arrives in the bar. Okay, so that's the 4 steps. And really an overarching concept, which is so simple, but it took me so long to move away from scale playing and box shapes to actually having the freedom. And that is, arguably, there is no difference between the notes in a chord and the notes you play for solos. Solos and chords, same stuff. Now, it took me a while to really get my head around that. Okay, but notes in a chord, the only difference is that you play notes in a chord all simultaneously in a strum. Okay, but notes in a solo, you play those same notes, but you play them one after another. And you also have to apply some phrasing and some timing, so you don't just go, because that's not really soloing, is it? You want to go, you know, timing, phrasing, bending, all of that. But there's no difference between soloing and chords. Stick with that one rule and you will go far. All right, why is that so important? Because it gets us to think about the chords and the notes in the chord and the particular notes in the chord that make that chord characteristic. You know, like what's the characteristic note of a major 7 chord? Because you want to emphasize those notes when that chord happens to bring out the color of the chord. And then when it changes to another chord, you need to know what's going on in that chord to do the same there in your melody stroke solos. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to use 2 open chords, okay? Just an open D and an open A7. And here's what we do. We start with a D, okay? And you remember from our last video, the notes, or rather the note numbers, or we often call them scale degrees, that occur in an open D shape. It starts with the 1, the 5, the 1 again in the higher octave, and the 3. Okay, so first of all, I need to just talk about the major scale. The way I teach the major scale in terms of its formula and structure is as follows. There are 2 frets distance between every single note of the major scale, apart from in 2 places. And those 2 places are between the 3 and the 4, and the 7 and the 1. That's it. Those are the exceptions, 3 and 4, 7 and 1. And those exceptions mean that there's only 1 fret distance between those notes. So remember that 3 and the 4, 7 and the 1, or 7 and the 8, depending on how you like to think about the octave. So when it comes to our D chord and making a melody, we've got our D chord, and let's say we want to play something relatively simple starting on the top string, okay, at the 2nd fret. Now we know that that note number is a 3, okay? So let's get orientated with where we are. So between the 3 and the next note in the scale, the 4, is how many frets? It's 1 fret. It's one of those exceptions, right? So between here and here, that's between the 3 and the 4. Okay, and now we're at the 4. What's the difference between the 4, or what's the distance between the 4 and the 5? That's 2 frets. The distance between the 5 and the 6, 2 frets. Distance between the 6 and the 7, if you said 1 fret, no, you're wrong. It's also 2 frets. The difference between, or the distance between the 7 and the 1, that's 1 fret. So from our note here, we've got this. Now you also need to do it in the opposite direction. Think about the notes below the note you're on. And because we're down at the 2nd fret, really, this is the 3. There's only one note available to us remaining on this string lower than this inside the major scale, and that is the 2. So how many frets is it away from the 3 to the 2? Yeah, it's 2 frets. So from there, 1 fret, 2 fret, so it's the open string. Okay, so for here, if we want to solo off this, we've got those notes. Now, we probably don't want to play it like that because it just sounds like I'm playing up the scale. But we do want to use those notes and maybe rearrange the order, play some of them twice, add some phrasing or whatever. But let's keep it simple for now. Let's play something like... So I've gone up a little bit and I've gone down a little bit. And now in the progression, let's imagine that's the point it changes to the A7. So on the A7, I'm going to stay on the same string just for this example, and then I'm going to show you stuff across the strings. So when it changes to A7, A7 is the 1, the 5, the flat 7, then we have the 3, then we have the 5. So in the context of the A7, this open string is now not the 2 in relation to the D chord, root note. It's now the 5 in relation to the A root note because the chord has changed. Okay, so that relationship of notes on the string versus the chord and the root note changes every time the chord changes in the progression. And let's play something really simple. So I know that's 5. Now we're in A. So how many frets to the 6? 2. So I can play that. Now, it's an A7 chord, and the A7 has a 1, 3, 5, and a flat 7. So I'm here at the 6. So how many frets do I need to move? What distance do I need to move to get to the flat 7 from the 6? Well, if I move 2 frets, I would get to the 7. But I don't want a 7, I want a flat 7. So the answer is just 1 fret. So let me show you how that melody might work. Okay, I've got a looper pedal here, so I'm going to create a loop with a D and an A7 in it. Here we go. Okay, cool, there's our loop. Now let's play. Starting at the 3. Okay, so you see how that works. Not particularly complicated. It's probably more complicated to try and turn the looper on and off than actually play. But yes, that was a single string kind of line, but what you want to do now is then look at the notes on the other string. So we've got this D, and the order of the scale degrees is 1, 5, octave of the 1, and the 3. So we did notes on the top E string, starting at the 3. So now let's look at the notes on the B string. And this is the 1, so we can follow the major scale formula up and down. So between the 1 and the 2, 2 frets. Between the 2 and the 3, 2 frets. 3 and the 4, 1 fret. 4 and the 5, 2 frets. 5 and 6, 2 frets. 6 and the 7, 2 frets. 7 and the 1, 1 fret. So again, look at that note where you are and then look at the notes below that. I'm calling these guys nearest neighbors, okay? So a couple of notes up and a couple of notes down is a good place to get you started on each of the strings. So this is the 1, okay? And where's the 7? The 7 is 1 fret down from the 1 because there's only 1 fret difference between the 7 and the 1. At the 7, between the 7 and the 6, 2 frets. So we go from this 2nd fret to the open string. So in terms of D, on the 2nd string, we've got things that we can play there. All right, so then once we've done that with the 1st string, starting on the 3, the 2nd string, knowing that that's the 1, and here, knowing that that's the 5, so you go 5, 6, 7, 1, 6, 5, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 5. So now you've got this ability to play across those 2 or 3 strings. Okay, so what I want you to be doing is looking at the nearest neighbors, remembering where you are, what scale degree number you're on, remembering what is the distance between the one you're on and the next note you want to play. And I want you to think about what's in the chord and what's in the next chord coming up, and where those color notes for the chord that's coming up appear nearest to you in your phrasing. So you get nice fluid lines rather than things that jump around, you know, from the 2nd fret to the 10th fret, stuff like that. Let me know if this makes sense. This is a great kind of primer to introduce you to a different way of playing that's more focused on playing the changes, spelling out the chords, and being more sophisticated and more melodic than just a pentatonic box player. And I was one of those for many, many years, too many years. And I know what it's like to be trapped and think that you only can go as far as the bits you know. That's because, for me at least, I was focused on scales and box shapes of those scales rather than thinking about the chords and the chord progression. Now, I always heard people talk about focus on the chords, but I never understood what that meant. What it means is the notes in the chord actually give you a really legitimate choice of good notes to play. and those are the ones you should use for your solo. You don't have to use all of them or just the notes in the chord. You can add others from the chromatic scale or any other scale, but I'm trying to get people away from thinking about soloing as execution of scales. Okay, it's all about focusing on the chords, the notes in the chords, and the notes surrounding those chords to make beautiful melodic lead lines. Okay, please leave a comment below if this makes sense to you. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me, and there is a worksheet on this as well, so you can grab that. It's in the description below. This is Phil from 15 Minute Guitar Practice, saying bye for now. Cheers.